My girlfriend admitted she was only dating me for money and wants to leave me now that I'm broke. I never thought the woman I built my life around would dissect our entire relationship with the cold precision of a surgeon, only to leave me bleeding on the operating table. My name is Alex, and I'm 28 years old. The air in our penthouse apartment, once filled with the scent of expensive candles and Isabella's floral perfume, now felt thick, heavy with the unspoken. It was the silence that was the loudest thing in the room. A silence that had been growing for months, ever since the first cracks appeared in my tech startup. At first, they were just hairline fractures, missed revenue targets, a key investor pulling out. But they grew into gaping chasms, and yesterday, the whole thing collapsed. My company, the one I had poured every ounce of my being into for the past 5 years, was officially bankrupt, and I was right there with it. I sat on the edge of our Italian leather sofa, the one Isabella had picked out, staring at the city lights twinkling below us. They looked like a million distant mocking stars, each one a reminder of the empire I had lost. The eviction notice for the office, the final emails from my now former employees, the legal notices, it all felt like a tidal wave of failure crashing over me, again and again. I heard the soft click of her heels on the hardwood floor before I saw her. Isabella. She was the embodiment of perfection, at least on the surface. Flawless skin, eyes the color of warm honey, and a smile that could disarm armies. We had been together for 3 years, 3 years of what I thought was a partnership. I was the ambitious builder, and she was my beautiful, supportive muse. I worked 18-hour days, and she filled our life with beauty, with dinner reservations at the most exclusive places, with vacations on private islands, with a social circle that glittered as brightly as the diamonds on her finger. I thought I was giving her the world, and in return, she gave me a reason to keep building. But something had shifted. In the last 6 months, as my business faltered, her touch felt a little cooler, her smiles a little more strained. The supportive texts stopped coming. The "how was your day" inquiries felt like formalities. I chalked it up to stress, my stress, and her stress from having to deal with me. I was a fool. She stood in the doorway to the living room, not looking at me, but at a painting on the wall, an abstract piece that cost more than my first car. Her arms were crossed, a defensive posture I knew all too well. It meant we were about to have a talk. Usually these talks were about a party we had to attend or a friend of hers who was being difficult. This time, I knew it would be about me, about my failure. I braced myself, expecting sympathy, maybe even frustration, but I never expected what came next. She finally turned her head, her eyes meeting mine. There was no pity in them, no sadness. There was something else, something that looked unnervingly like calculation. She took a slow breath, as if preparing to deliver a rehearsed speech. The city lights reflected in her pupils, but they held no warmth. It was in that moment, a split second before she even spoke, that a cold dread, sharp and visceral, washed over me. This wasn't going to be a conversation about how we would get through this together. This was something else entirely. This was the end of something, but it was also the beginning of a horrifying truth I had been too blind to see. She didn't sit down. She remained standing, a towering figure in the dimly lit room, casting a long shadow that seemed to swallow me whole. The silence stretched, thin and taut, before she finally broke it. Her voice was calm, devoid of any tremor, which somehow made it all the more terrifying. She told me she was leaving. The words hung in the air, stark and brutal. Not "we should take a break," not "I need some space," but a definitive, final statement. She was leaving me. She said that with my business gone, there was no reason for her to stay. My mind reeled, trying to process the clinical way she delivered this blow. It was like a business transaction being terminated, not a 3-year relationship ending. I must have looked like a fish out of water, my mouth opening and closing, unable to form a single coherent thought. She seemed to take my silence as a cue to continue, to elaborate on the terms of our dissolution. And that's when she dropped the bombshell, the one that didn't just shatter my heart, but obliterated my entire past. She admitted it. She admitted that the entire foundation of our relationship was a lie. She told me, in plain, unadorned language, that she had never been in love with me. She had been in love with the lifestyle I provided. She said she had seen me at a tech conference 3 years ago, the keynote speaker, full of confidence and promise, and had seen an opportunity. She described our first date not as a magical connection, but as a successful initial interview. She recounted the early days of our romance, the moments I had cherished as memories of falling in love, as strategic steps in a carefully executed plan. The weekend trip to Napa? It was a test of my spending habits. The designer handbag I bought her for her birthday? A benchmark she had set for future gifts. Each memory I held dear was rewritten in real time, painted over with a coat of cynical, mercenary intention. She spoke of my ambition as my most attractive quality, not because it drove me, but because of what it produced. My success was her aphrodisiac. My money was the true object of her affection. I felt the air leave my lungs, as if I had been physically punched in the stomach. The past 3 years of my life unspooled before my eyes, a film reel now revealed to be a work of fiction. Every I love you, every tender moment, every shared laugh, it was all part of her performance. She was an actress, and I had been her stage, her benefactor, her unwitting dupe. She explained that she had grown up with nothing, that she had vowed she would never go back to that life, and I, with my rocketing trajectory, had been her ticket out. She saw my recent failure not as a tragedy to be shared, but as a stock market crash, a signal to sell all her assets and get out before she lost everything. She wasn't angry with me for failing, she was disappointed in the asset. She said all of this while looking me directly in the eye, her expression unchanging. There was no guilt, no remorse, no hint of the woman I thought I knew. It was a confession, but it felt more like a business report. And then she delivered the final, crushing blow. She told me her bags were already packed. She had known this was coming for weeks, ever since the first major investor pulled out. She hadn't been hoping for a miracle, she had been preparing her exit strategy. She had already found a new place to stay, courtesy, she hinted, of a new friend. While I was still drowning in the wreckage of her confession, Isabella moved with a chilling efficiency. She turned and walked towards our bedroom, her steps as measured and deliberate as always. I remained frozen on the sofa, a statue of a broken man, my mind a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. There was shock, a profound, bone-deep disbelief that this was actually happening. There was a white-hot rage, a fury so pure it felt like it could incinerate everything in the room. But beneath it all was a cavernous, aching sadness, a grief for a love that never existed, for a future that had just been erased. I could hear the soft thuds from the bedroom, the sound of drawers being opened, the zipper of a suitcase. Each sound was a hammer blow, chipping away at what was left of my soul. She wasn't just packing her clothes, she was surgically removing herself from my life, excising any trace that she had ever been here. Part of me, the part that was still the ambitious, problem-solving CEO, wanted to storm in there, to scream, to demand answers, to fight. But what was there to fight for? The battle was already over. I had lost before I even knew there was a war. The other part of me, the part that was just a man who had been betrayed in the most fundamental way possible, just wanted it to be over. I wanted her to disappear, to take her poison and leave me to rot in peace. After what felt like an eternity, she emerged. She was pulling a large designer suitcase behind her, the one I had bought her for our trip to Milan. She had changed out of her heels into a pair of stylish flats, ready for her departure. She paused in the living room, her eyes scanning the space as if memorizing it, or perhaps saying goodbye to the material possessions she was leaving behind. She looked at the painting, the sofa, the view. Her gaze finally landed on me, still sitting in the same spot. For a fleeting second, I thought I saw something flicker in her eyes. Regret? Pity? But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by that same unnerving composure. This was it, the moment of confrontation, the moment where the spurned lover was supposed to break down or erupt in anger. I could feel the expectation hanging in the air between us. She was waiting for my reaction, my response. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. The storm of rage and grief subsided, replaced by a cold, clear calm, a clarity that was as terrifying as it was liberating. I saw her for what she was, not a heartbreaker, but a parasite. And you don't plead with a parasite, you remove it. I slowly stood up, my joints stiff. I walked towards her, not with aggression, but with a strange, steady purpose. I stopped a few feet from her. I looked her up and down, taking in the perfect hair, the expensive clothes, the cold beauty. I saw the suitcase, her ticket to a new life funded by my failure. And then I did something that surprised us both. I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile or a sad one. It was a small, knowing, almost pitying smile. And then I spoke. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the silence like a shard of glass. I wished her well. I told her I hoped she found everything she was looking for. I told her that I was grateful. Her perfectly composed mask finally cracked. A flicker of confusion, of genuine shock crossed her face. She had been prepared for tears, for anger, for threats. She had not been prepared for this, for my quiet, calm dismissal, for my gratitude. She stood there, speechless, for the first time since this whole ordeal began. Her carefully constructed script had been thrown out the window, and she was an actress without her lines. With that, I turned my back on her and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the city that was no longer mine. I didn't watch her leave. I didn't need to. A few moments later, I heard the soft click of the front door, followed by the definitive thud of it closing. She was gone, and in the deafening silence that followed, I was finally, painfully alone. The silence that followed the closing of the door was a physical entity. It pressed in on me from all sides, a heavy, suffocating blanket. The apartment, once a symbol of my success, now felt like a mausoleum. Every object was tainted with her presence, a ghost of a life that was a lie. The sofa where we'd cuddled, the kitchen where we'd cooked elaborate meals, the bed where we'd slept, it all felt contaminated. I didn't move from the window for what felt like hours. The city lights blurred into a meaningless wash of color. My mind was a blank slate, wiped clean by the sheer trauma of the evening. The initial shock had given way to a profound, hollow numbness. I felt nothing. No sadness, no anger, just a vast, empty void. The next few days passed in a surreal, dreamlike haze. I didn't eat, I didn't sleep. I just wandered through the cavernous apartment like a ghost, haunted by memories that had been retroactively poisoned. I'd find myself picking up a framed photo of us on a vacation in Bali, a photo where I was beaming, my arm around her, and I'd feel a disconnect so powerful it was dizzying. Who was that man in the picture? So happy, so oblivious. I pitied him. I started to replay our entire relationship, dissecting every conversation, every moment, with the ruthless clarity of hindsight. The red flags, once subtle and easily dismissed, now blazed like a forest fire. The way she'd always steer the conversation towards money, towards status. The way she'd only show interest in my work when it resulted in a bonus or a successful funding round. The way she'd dismiss my friends who weren't successful enough for her social circle. I remembered one specific time, about a year ago, when my company had a major setback. I had come home distraught, looking for comfort. She had listened to me for about 5 minutes before sighing and telling me she had a spa appointment she couldn't miss, and that I needed to be more positive because my negative energy was bringing down the vibe of the apartment. At the time, I had been hurt, but I had chalked it up to her being emotionally reserved. Now, I saw it for what it was, a profound lack of empathy. She didn't care about my struggle. She only cared about how it affected her comfort. The most painful realization was that I had been an active participant in my own deception. I had wanted so badly to believe in the fairy tale, in the beautiful, supportive girlfriend and the power couple narrative, that I had willfully ignored the truth. I had seen what I wanted to see. I was so focused on building my empire that I never stopped to question if the queen by my side was actually my ally. The numbness began to wear off, replaced by a slow, simmering anger. Not at her, not anymore. She was what she was. The anger was directed at myself, at my own blindness, my own arrogance. I had confused net worth with self-worth. I had thought that if I could provide her with everything, I would be worthy of her love. It was a pathetic, shallow equation, and I had been the fool to solve it. On the fourth day, as I was listlessly scrolling through my phone, a notification popped up. It was a text from an old college friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in over a year. It was a simple message. Heard about what happened. Sorry, man. Let me know if you need anything. It was a small thing, a simple gesture of human kindness, but in the sterile, artificial world I had been living in, it felt like a lifeline. It was a connection to something real, something authentic. It was a reminder that there was a life before Isabella, a life before the penthouse and the private jets, a life where I was just Alex, a guy with a crazy idea and a few good friends. For the first time since she left, a tear slid down my cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness, but of release, a crack in the dam of my own self-pity. And through that crack, a tiny, almost imperceptible sliver of light began to shine. That single text message became my anchor. It was a tether to a world I had long forgotten, a world that wasn't measured in stock options or social media followers. I stared at my friend's words for a long time, the simple, unadorned sincerity of them a stark contrast to the transactional nature of my recent life. With a trembling hand, I typed back a reply. It wasn't a long message, just a simple, "Thanks, man, I appreciate it." But hitting send felt like a monumental step. It was the first time I had reached out to anyone since the collapse. It was an admission that I needed help, that I couldn't do this alone. That one small act of connection broke the spell of my isolation. I spent the rest of the day in a frenzy of activity, a stark contrast to the lethargic stupor of the previous week. I started cleaning, not just tidying up, but a deep, purging clean. I went through the apartment room by room and systematically removed every trace of Isabella. Her ridiculously expensive skincare products went into a trash bag. Her vast collection of designer clothes, which filled an entire walk-in closet, were boxed up. I contacted a consignment store and arranged for them to pick everything up. I wasn't doing it out of spite, but out of a necessity for survival. I couldn't breathe in a space that was still hers. With each item I removed, I felt a little lighter, as if I were shedding a skin that wasn't my own. The penthouse, which had once felt like the pinnacle of achievement, now felt like a gilded cage. It was too big, too empty, too full of painful memories. I knew I couldn't stay. I listed it for sale, a painful but necessary amputation. While I waited for it to sell, I needed a new project, something to pour my energy into, something that was mine and mine alone. My mind, now clear of the fog of heartbreak and betrayal, started to work again. I thought back to my college days, to the reason I got into tech in the first place. It wasn't for the money. It was for the love of building, of solving problems. I remembered a small side project I had started back then, a simple app designed to help people connect with local artisans and craftspeople. I had abandoned it when my big startup took off, deeming it not scalable enough, not profitable enough. Now it seemed like the most perfect idea in the world. It was about connection, about community, about things that were real and tangible. I found my old laptop, the one I had used in college, and fired it up. The files were still there, a digital fossil from a simpler time. I spent the next few weeks holed up in a cheap motel room, the proceeds from selling Isabella's clothes keeping me afloat. I worked with a feverish intensity I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the frantic, caffeine-fueled hustle of my previous company. This was different. This was a labor of love. I was coding, designing, and writing, not for investors or for a potential billion-dollar valuation, but for myself. I was building something from the ashes of my old life, a small, humble creation that was a testament to my own resilience. I started a simple blog to document the process, writing about my journey, my failures, and my small victories. I wrote about the importance of authenticity, of finding value in things other than money. I didn't think anyone would read it. It was more of a diary, a way to process my thoughts and keep myself accountable. But then something strange happened. People started reading. A few comments here and there, then a few more. People reached out, not with pity, but with encouragement. They shared their own stories of failure and redemption. I had stumbled upon a community of people who were tired of the fake, curated perfection of social media, who were craving something real. One afternoon, I received an email. It was from a small pottery studio in a town a few hours away. They had seen my blog and my app's prototype. They wanted to be the first artisan to be featured on my platform. It was the first piece of external validation I had received in months. It wasn't a multi-million-dollar investment, but it felt like $1 billion. It was a sign that I was on the right path, that I was building something that mattered. I sat there in my cheap motel room, looking at the email on my screen, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a genuine sense of hope.
It was a fragile, flickering flame in the darkness, but it was mine, and I was determined to protect it. 6 months passed. The world, which had stopped for me in that penthouse apartment, had kept on turning. My life had transformed in ways I never could have predicted. The penthouse sold, and I used the proceeds to pay off my remaining debts and buy a small, run-down cabin on a patch of land in the woods. It was a world away from the city skyline. It was quiet, it was mine, and it was real. My little app, which I had named Artisan, was slowly but surely growing. It was no longer just me. A small, dedicated team had formed, a group of like-minded individuals I had met through my blog. We were a motley crew of coders, designers, and writers, all working remotely, united by a shared vision. We weren't getting rich. In fact, most of us were barely scraping by, but we were happy. We were building something we believed in. The platform now featured over 100 artisans from all over the country, from woodworkers and potters to jewelers and weavers. We were connecting them with a new audience, with people who appreciated the story behind the products, not just the price tag. I had found a new kind of success, one that was measured in community, not capital. I had found a new version of myself, too. The Alex who was defined by his net worth was gone. In his place was a man who found joy in a morning walk in the woods, in the satisfaction of a well-written line of code, in the simple pleasure of a home-cooked meal. I was reconnecting with my old friends, the ones Isabella had deemed unsuccessful. I discovered they were the most successful people I knew, rich in character, loyalty, and kindness. I was healing. The scars from Isabella's betrayal were still there, a constant reminder of the man I used to be. But they no longer hurt. They were just a part of my story, a cautionary tale that had ultimately led me to a better place. I had almost completely forgotten about her, about the life we had. She was like a character from a book I had read a long time ago. Then, one Tuesday evening, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. A voice I had tried so hard to forget, came through the line. It was Isabella. Her tone was different. The cold, clinical composure was gone, replaced by a hesitant, almost syrupy sweetness that was completely alien to me. She started by saying she hoped I was doing well, that she had been thinking about me. She said she had seen my blog, that she was so impressed by what I was building. She talked about how she had made a mistake, that she had been young and foolish, that she hadn't realized what she had until it was gone. She painted a picture of her own life, hinting that things hadn't worked out with the friend she had left me for, that she had been through a difficult time. She was spinning a new narrative, one where she was the victim and I was the prize she had foolishly let go. And then she got to the point. She wanted to see me. She suggested we meet for a drink, to catch up. The subtext was clear. She had seen that I was building something new, that I was getting back on my feet. And she wanted back in. She saw my new venture, my new community, not as a testament to my growth, but as a new asset to be acquired. I listened to her entire speech without interrupting, a strange sense of déjà vu washing over me. It was the same calculated approach, the same performative emotion, just with a different goal. The old Alex, the one from the penthouse, might have been flattered, might have even considered it, but I wasn't that man anymore. I had built a new life on the rubble of the one she had destroyed, and I wasn't about to let her anywhere near it. As she finished her pitch, a silence fell on the line. She was waiting for my answer, expecting me to be swayed by her tale of woe. I took a deep breath, the clean, pine-scented air of my new home filling my lungs, and I knew exactly what I had to say. The silence on the phone stretched, a fragile thread connecting my past to my present. I could hear Isabella's faint, expectant breathing on the other end of the line. She was waiting for me to take the bait, to fall back into the old pattern of seeking her approval, of believing her version of reality. But the world had shifted on its axis since she had walked out of that penthouse, and I was no longer standing in the same place. I looked out the window of my small cabin, at the towering pine trees silhouetted against the twilight sky. A sense of profound peace settled over me, a calm certainty that I had never experienced in my old life of luxury and ambition. I finally broke the silence. My voice was steady, quiet, but it carried an undeniable weight. I told her that I appreciated her call, but that I wasn't interested in catching up. I said that I was glad she was doing well, and I genuinely wished her the best in her life. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. She hadn't expected this. She had expected anger or bitterness or maybe even a gleeful "I told you so." She hadn't expected calm, final dismissal. I continued. I told her that she had been right about one thing. Her leaving was the best thing that ever happened to me. I explained that her betrayal had forced me to tear down my own life, to strip away all the artificiality and the superficiality that I had mistaken for happiness. It had forced me to figure out who I was when I wasn't the CEO with the penthouse and the glamorous girlfriend. I told her that I had found a new kind of success, a new kind of wealth, one that had nothing to do with money. It was a wealth of purpose, of community, of self-respect. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was simply stating the truth. I was setting the record straight, not for her, but for myself. I was closing the final chapter of our story on my own terms. I told her that the man she wanted to get back with didn't exist anymore. He was a ghost, a construct built on a foundation of sand. And I had no interest in being a ghost. I was too busy building a real life. I could hear her stammering, trying to find the words, trying to regain control of the conversation. She started to say something about how I was being cruel, how I was throwing away a second chance. But I didn't let her finish. I thanked her again for the call and for the lesson. Then I said goodbye, and before she could respond, I hung up. I placed the phone down on the rough-hewn wooden table, a feeling of immense relief washing over me. It was over. Truly, finally over. There was no anger, no triumph, no sense of victory. There was only peace, a quiet, unshakable peace. The last tie to my old life had been severed, and I was free. I walked outside onto the porch of my cabin. The air was cool and crisp, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth. I looked up at the sky, a vast canopy of stars, infinitely more beautiful and real than the glittering city lights I used to idolize. I thought about the journey I had been on, from the dizzying heights of success to the crushing depths of failure, and finally to this quiet, solid ground. I had lost everything I thought I wanted, and in doing so, I had found everything I ever needed. I wasn't a billionaire. I didn't live in a penthouse. I didn't have a supermodel girlfriend. But I had myself. And for the first time in my life, that was more than enough. The future wasn't a glittering prize to be won, but a path to be walked, one step at a time. And as I stood there under the vast star-filled sky, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. I was home.